Hey guys, in this lesson I want to talk about diminished scales and how to use them in the blues, particularly the half-whole diminished scale. Many of my favourite players from Robben Ford to Osnoy to John Scofield love to use diminished scales and arpeggios to connect chords in their improvisations and just to add tension and resolution within their lines. So first, I suppose we need to play the half-whole diminished scale. In this lesson, I'm going to do a blues in A, and I'm going to explain exactly where to use this scale to connect chords together and how that's going to work. So the first thing we should do is just play the scale. I'm going to play it from A on the top string, 5th fret. I'm going to start on my 3rd finger, and I'll put a diagram on the screen to show the fingering for the scale. It's going to sound like this. So now that we've played the scale, let's talk about how to use it. The main place that I use this scale is when you have a 5-to-1 chord progression. All that means is you're going from the 5th chord in the key that you're in home to the 1st chord of the key. So in the blues, there are 2 main areas that I'll use this scale, and people like Robben Ford will use it. One of them is more obvious than the other. So the obvious one is at the end of the progression when you have E7 going home to A, or A7. That's a 5-to-1 chord progression already. Just E going to A is 5 going to 1 in the key. Now, where you actually use the scale is off the root note of the 5 chord. So we could use an E half-whole diminished scale going from E7 home to A7. But let's backtrack a little bit to the beginning of the progression. So at the beginning of the blues, we have A7 going to D7. Normally you would think of that as 1 going to 4. A7 going to D7 can also be seen, if you look at it the other way around, A going down to D. So if we count backwards through the music alphabet from A to D, we have A, G, F, E, D. And that's actually a 5th. So A going to D can be seen as going down a 5th, or it can be seen as going up a 4th. This is something it took me a while to realize. So if you just pretend for a moment in your blues, you're going from A down a 5th to D, just for that little moment, you can actually play the A half-whole diminished scale, and that will pull you into the D7. So there's a number of ways we can do this. I'm going to just start by playing the A half-whole diminished scale from A, the root note. I'm just going to play a line that lasts 8 notes, and that's going to pull us perfectly into the D7. And where I'm going to do it is the very bar before the D7 comes up in the 12-bar blues. So I've got a little loop here, and in the bar before we change to the D7, I'm just going to play the A half-whole diminished scale, descending, and then I'm going to resolve it. I'm just going to end the line on the 7th fret of the D string. That's going to be a perfect note inside our D7 chord, because that'll be the 5th of the D7. So I'm going to play some blues, and then in that bar I'm just going to play that line. Let's see how that sounds. So there we go. That was just the A half whole diminished scale, leading us into the D7. So again, we're treating the A7 to D7 as if it's a 5-to-1 progression, because the 5-to-1 chord progression is where this scale is really useful. So there's one other spot where this happens, and that's the E7 going to A7 at the end of the blues, the 5-to-1. So what if I just do the exact same thing in that bar before we get back to A7, but this time I play the E half whole diminished scale? So let me play the E half whole diminished scale up and back down for you, just so you can see how that looks. I'll use the same fingering. I'm just going to be starting on the second string, or the fifth string, depending on what you call that. So the A string, 7th fret with my third finger. And I'm just going to play up and down the E half whole diminished scale. Let's see how that sounds. So now I'm going to do it in the context of the loop that I have here. And when we get to that bar, just before we get back to the beginning of the progression, in the bar of E7 there, I'm just going to play that scale descending. I'm going to play just 8th notes from E, and that's going to bring me basically down to my low E on the A string here, 7th fret, which is going to be a perfect note inside the A7 chord. So again, all we have to do is play the scale. It works great. Robben Ford talks about this a lot. Don't be afraid just to play the scale. And this one's a good example of that, because it works perfectly. So let me play the A half whole diminished descending when we go from A7 to D7. And then when we get to the end of the progression, I'm going to play the E half whole diminished descending to get us back into the A. So there we go. I just use the A half whole diminished to get us from A to D. And then I use the E half whole to get us from E back to A7. It really is as simple as that to get started. It's just knowing where to play the scale off, which took me quite a while to find out where exactly do I use that scale. So now that you know that, well, now we can do a lot of different things. We could play the scale from a different interval maybe. What if I play it from the minor third? So if I play the A half whole diminished, maybe starting on C on the 8th fret of the E string, I'm just going to descend down the scale. I'm going to play 8 notes again evenly, and I'm just going to resolve at the end. Now, the problem is here, I'm going to end up on the 6th fret of the G string, which will be here, which is not a great note over the D7, because D7 doesn't have a C sharp in it. It's got either a C or we can play a D. So what I'm going to do is sidestep probably to the 5th fret or the 7th fret. Let's do the 5th fret first. So I'm going to play down the scale from C. It's going to sound like this. I'm going to do that going from A7 to D7. Let's see how that sounds. Now, something to be aware of is that what I'm doing here in the loop that I've created, I am going to D7 in the very second bar as well. It's a common thing to just go to that D7 in the second bar to mix things up a little bit. So you can actually use the A half whole diminished straight away in that little change as well. So I could use it immediately to get me to that D7 in the second bar, and then back to A7, and then I can use it again to get to the D7. So I was using it just to get us to the D7 in the very second bar as well. For example, like this, if I just play maybe 2 beats of blues scale, and then on the second half of the bar, I'm going to use that half whole diminished to pull us to the D7 straight away. So you can hear there at the end of that little bit of playing there that I just used the A half whole diminished from the C, and I just played 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, right, to get us into a nice note over the D7. That note, I didn't really have to think about anything. I just played the next note in the A half whole diminished, and it ends up being a great note anyway. The 7th fret on the B string, which is an F sharp, is the 3rd of the D7 chord, so it works perfectly. So all I'm doing at the moment is just playing the scale descending. It works great. What if we try some 16th note lines? This is just to give you an idea of what sort of sounds you can get into by mixing the notes around a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing, use the A half whole diminished to get from A to D, and then use the E half whole to get us back at the end of the progression to A. I'm going to mix the notes up a little bit, and I'm going to do some 16th note lines. some 16th note lines there. If you mess around with the scale a lot, I don't see any problem with noodling when you learn a new scale. Don't be afraid to just noodle with the scale a little bit, mess around with it, get it under your fingers in free time. Mess around maybe with playing some patterns. You know, simple as like 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5 through the degrees of the scale. I hope that makes sense. You're treating the A7 to D7 as a 5 to 1, and the 5 to 1 is where we want to use that scale. Maybe to finish off, I'll also play some ideas just over a static chord vamp. So this is another way that you can use this. I'm just going to do a loop with a like an A dominant 9 or A dominant 7 sort of vamp, and I'm just going to play some blues ideas mixing in the half whole diminished scale. Let's give that a try. So I hope you got something out of that lesson, explaining where exactly to use that half whole diminished in a blues context. It's a really handy scale, and it just works really nicely even if you just play the scale down, you know, descending. You can play it ascending as well. In this lesson, we didn't have time to get into, you know, a bunch of all these different sort of diminished licks that you can do, but there's endless things that you can come up with. But I would start by just trying to get that under your fingers and just playing simple eighth note lines just to connect the chords. So let me know how you go in the comments. If you have any questions, if I can clear anything else up, or any requests for any other lessons on similar topics. I'm going to play you out now, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.